Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Gopinata, Radha Gopinata, Shri Radha. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Cham Vishnupat Param Savrajkachara Stottara Shata Sivangre Sabhaicharinda Bhaktiranta Samvishwa Prabhupada Ki Jai. Cham Vishnupat Param Savrajkachara Stottara Shata Sivangre Bhaktisidhanta Saraswati Goswami Rachila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. Granta Rachima Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Nitya Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bhai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna, today we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 2, Remembrance of Lord Krishna, Text 20. Tathaiva chanye naraloka vira. Tathaiva chanye ya ahave Krishna mukara vindam. Netrai pipanto nayana viramam. Partastra puta padama purasya. Tathaiva chanye naraloka vira. Ya ahave Krishna mukara vindam. Netrai pipanto nayana viramam. Padastra puta padama purasya. Tathaiva chanye naraloka vira. Ya ahave Krishna mukara vindam. Netrai pipanto nayana viramam. Partastra puta padam apurasya. Tathaiva chanye naraloka vira. Ave Krishna mukara vindam. Netrai pipanto nayana viramam. Padastra puta padama purasya. Tathaiva chanye naraloka vira. Ya ahave Krishna mukara vindam. Netrai pipanto nayana viramam. Padastra puta padama purasya. Tathaiva chanye naraloka vira. Ya ahave Krishna mukara vindam. Netra pipanto nayana viramam Padastraputa padama pudasya Tata, as also evacha, and certainly anye, others, naraloka, human society, viraha, fighters, ye, those, ahave, on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Krishna, Lord Krishna's Mukha Aravindam, face like a lotus flower, Netrahi, with the eyes, Pipantaha, while seeing, Nayana Abhiramam, very pleasing to the eyes, Partha, Arjuna, Astraputaha, purified by arrows, Padam, abode, Apuhu, achieved, Asya, of him. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace about Charan Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. Certainly others who were fighters on the battlefield of Kurukshetra were purified by the onslaught of Arjuna's arrows, and while seeing the lotus-like face of Krishna so pleasing to the eyes, they achieved the abode of the Lord. Purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, appears in this world for two missionary purposes, to deliver the faithful and to annihilate the miscreants. But because the Lord is absolute, He has two different kinds of actions, although apparently different, are ultimately one and the same. His annihilation of a person like Shishupal is as auspicious as his actions for the protection of the faithful. All the warriors who fought against Arjuna, but who were able to see the lotus-like face of the Lord on the battlefront, achieved the abode of the Lord, exactly as the devotees of the Lord do. The words pleasing to the eyes of the seer are very significant. When the warriors from the other side of the battlefield saw Lord Krishna at the front, they appreciated his beauty, and their dormant instinct of love of God was awakened. Shishupal saw the Lord also, but he saw him as his enemy, and his love was not awakened. Therefore Shishupal achieved oneness with the Lord by merging in the impersonal glare of his body called the Brahmajyoti. Others who were in the marginal position, being neither friends nor enemies, but slightly in love of Godhead, by appreciating the beauty of his face, were at once promoted to the spiritual planets, the Vaikunthas. The Lord's personal abode is called Golaka Vrindavana, and the abodes where his plenary expansions reside are called the Vaikunthas, where the Lord is present as Narayana. Love of Godhead is dormant in every living entity, and the entire process of devotional service unto the Lord is meant for awakening this dormant, eternal love of Godhead. But there are degrees of such transcendental awakening. Those whose love of God is awakened to the fullest extent go back to the Golak Vrindavan planet in the spiritual sky, whereas persons who have just awakened to love of Godhead, by accident or association, are transferred to the Vaikuntha planets. Essentially, there is no material difference between Golaka and Vaikuntha, but in the Vaikunthas the Lord is served in unlimited opulence, whereas in Golaka the Lord is served in natural affection. This love of God is awakened by the association of pure devotees of the Lord. Here the word Partastra Putaha is significant. Those who saw the beautiful face of the Lord on the battlefield of Kurukshetra were purified first by Arjuna when he made his onslaught with arrows. The Lord appeared for the mission of diminishing the burden of the world, and Arjuna was assisting the Lord by fighting on his behalf. Arjuna personally declined to fight, and the whole instruction of the Bhagavad Gita was given to Arjuna to engage him in the fight. As a pure devotee of the Lord, Arjuna agreed to fight in preference to his own decision, and thus Arjuna fought to assist the Lord in his mission of diminishing the burden of the world. All the activities of a pure devotee are executed on behalf of the Lord, because a pure devotee of the Lord has nothing to do for his personal interest. Arjuna's killing was as good as killing by the Lord himself. As soon as Arjuna shot an arrow at an enemy, that enemy became purified of all material contaminations and became eligible to be transferred to the spiritual sky. Those warriors who appreciated the lotus feet of the Lord and saw his face at the front had their dormant love of God awakened, and thus they were transferred at once to Vaikuntha Loka, not to the impersonal state of Brahmacharya as was Shishupal. Shishupal died without appreciating the Lord, while others died with appreciation of the Lord. Both were transferred to the spiritual sky, but those who awakened to love of God were transferred to the planets of the transcendental sky. Uddhava seemingly lamented that his own position was less than that of the warriors on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, because they had attained to Vaikuntha, whereas he remained to lament the disappearance of the Lord. Om Jnanatimrandasya Granjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manabhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadate Svapatantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttabhaktavanam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamshcha Shri Rupam Sakachatam Sahakana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sachivam Sadvetam Savatutam Prechana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Revam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahakana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamshcha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Kopesha Kopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gauranga Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhana Sate Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Vancha Kalpatarubhashcha Kripa Sindhu Bhayavacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktarinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Welcome to this morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. So we're continuing the chapter Remembrance of Lord Krishna, which we know whose remembrance it is, as we heard at the end of the purport. It is by Uddhava, the close friend of Krishna in Dwarka, and he is responding to Vidura's inquiries upon the mat at the bank of the river Yamuna, while Vidura was in pilgrimage, as we discussed. And so we heard after first Uddhava immediately went into full ecstasy upon intensifying his remembrance of the Lord, being reminded by Vidura, and then when coming back and starting to answer, he stated that, because in the previous chapter Vidura asked about all the welfare of all the different of Krishna and all his associates and family. And so he stated, what is the question of the welfare of anyone if Krishna himself, the Son of the world, has said. So, and then he started remembering different pastimes of the Lord and different qualities of the Lord. And so in yesterday's verse, it was the similar theme like today about the Lord's mercy in regard to not only to devotees but even to non-devotees. As yesterday I'll quickly read again the translation. Uddhava was saying, you have personally, so he's saying to Vidura, and personally seen means, because yesterday he spoke about the incident which happened at the Rajasuya sacrifice, and Vidura was there present as well. So that's why he's saying, you have personally seen how the king of Chedi, Shishupal, achieved success in yoga practice, although he hated Lord Krishna. Even the actual yogis aspire after such success with great interest for performance of the various practices. Who can tolerate separation from him? And we heard a fantastic class by Toshan Krishna Prabhu about the Lord's mercy upon even demons, and not only and Prabhu was pointing out that generally, yes, when Krishna kills demons, then they achieve the impersonal liberation merging in the Brahmacharya, as we in today's purport Prabhupada discussed as well, about Shishupal again. But he pointed out that many times actually they apparently achieved that, but then their love was awakened and they achieved at least some liberation in the Vaikuntha, as today Prabhupada discusses that there's still a distinction between achieving Vaikuntha and achieving Golok Vrindavan. That for Golok Vrindavan, there only go those who whose love of God is just completely awakened, as Prabhupada says today. Whereas to Vaikuntha, so to say, you can get there if you're a bit lucky, somehow getting mercy. And so, yeah, that was about Krishna's killing demons, and then Toshan Prabhu pointed out especially the pastime of with Kaliya, that where Krishna didn't kill Kaliya, but we know the chapter in Krishna book there is called Chastisement of Kaliya, and he explained how the Lord, as we today also Prabhupada discusses here, he is absolute, so his apparent chastisement is also great mercy, and thus it was actually rather it was purification of Kaliya, and so that at the end Kaliya followed in the footsteps of his wives, and actually, like it's mentioned there by the acharyas, that he literally just paraphrased the prayers that his wives had just offered there to Krishna, and because he himself doesn't know, he was all along he was a non-devotee and full of envy, but then being purified, and then he immediately followed in the footsteps of devotees there of his own wives, and also offered prayers to the Lord. And and today we Uddhava continued about now the Lord's mercy unto all the warriors on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, that all of them, specifically it's mentioned that they did not just achieve impersonal liberation, but they all went back to Godhead. And how is that? Uddhava himself explains here in the verse that because they were purified by the onslaught of Arjuna's arrows. So because of they first received the mercy of a devotee, then they could fully appreciate the mercy of Krishna. So I'll quickly read the translation again. Certainly others who were fighters on the battlefield of Kurukshetra were purified by the onslaught of Arjuna's arrows, and while seeing the lotus-like face of Krishna so pleasing to the eyes, they achieved the abode of the Lord. And Prabhupada put an amazing purport where he first pointed out what we just discussed, that there is still a big difference between those demons being killed by the Lord but not being able to appreciate the Lord, and thus simply achieving impersonal liberation, and those who actually become devotees, like all those warriors. And Prabhupada, first he explained the aspect of them appreciating Krishna's beauty. So Prabhupada, I'll read one sentence here again, very nicely explains that he says that when the warriors from the other side of the battlefield saw Lord Krishna at the front, they appreciated his beauty, and their dormant instinct of love of God was awakened. So the language Prabhupada uses is amazing, always like this sentence. The dormant instinct of love of God was awakened. So immediately shows in that way on the one hand it seems wonderful, like how can it be someone who just fought against Krishna, was envious, and his whole life didn't do any devotional service, can simply then by being killed by Krishna or by Arjuna on the battlefield, when seeing Krishna and somehow thinking, oh wow, this person is beautiful, can straight go back to Godhead. But Prabhupada in the same sentence he makes the point, and their dormant instinct of love of God was awakened. So it's love of God is not something acquired externally, but we know every single jiva has it eternally in his inherently or inherent. So like how does the verse go? There's a beautiful verse in CC, right? Also where it's explained. That one. Tasida Krishna. Tasida Krishna Prema. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Savya Sadhya Kabonayam Shravanadi Shuddha Chitta Karayodaya. That where it's explained that it's Nityasita, it's eternally present in perfection, this love of God, but it cannot be, and it's never acquired at any point, but by the process of hearing and the other process of devotional service, it can simply be awakened. So, and that we see here as well, that in that case, it was simply enough, as Prabhu explains, that first they got purified by Arjuna's errors, and then they had this purification was enough that them then seeing Lord Krishna personally in his most beautiful form, acting there on the battlefield as the charity of Arjuna, that they had appreciation for his beauty, and that was enough for them to go back to Godhead. And whereas Prabhupada points out, Shishupal was, he was his whole life. He never had direct appreciation of Krishna, only indirect. Envy is actually indirect appreciation. So he was like completely full of envy, like right from his birth. Even it's mentioned as a toddler, or whenever the first words that came out of him was calling out names of Krishna, but in hatred. So that's, of course, he could not achieve the same result. And then Prabhupada points out the difference between Vaikuntha and Goloka Vrindavan, that the Lord, in Vaikuntha is served in Aishvarya in unlimited opulence. So for that, and those warriors, they achieved that destination. They achieved different Vaikuntha planets where the Lord is present in his expansions of different forms of Narayan. And whereas Prabhupada says in Golaka, the Lord is served in natural affection. So natural affection again indicates there's no need for the Lord displaying any opulence, or no need for any formalities, for nothing. There it's simply in completely spontaneous, ecstatic love of God, that all the Rajavasis are naturally so attracted to Krishna that they can't do anything other than thinking for the pleasure of Krishna, and of Krishna meaning of him simply as a person as they see him, which is not as God, because they are covered. We discussed that recently. Narasimha Prabhu gave a nice class about also that difference between Aishwarya Bhav and Madhurya, Madhurya, but how do you say, in the different, of course also in Vatsalya and in Sakya. And the love in Golok Vrindavan, in spontaneous love, without Krishna showing apparently opulences, but simply by that they are simply engrossed by his sweetness. And then Prabhupada pointed out about that it is by the association of pure devotees that we can get this love of God, and in that case it was simply Arjuna's shooting his arrows, that the touch of those arrows shot by a devotee purified them already, and thus then they were ready to appreciate Krishna's beauty. And then Prabhupada made the point about that, because it seems a bit bewildering for someone who is not aware of Krishna consciousness and all of that how can it be that a devotee, he shoots arrows at his enemies and then they become, that is their first step of awakening love of God. Rather, we think some devotees are supposed to be good persons, so they're supposed to be non-violent. But, so all of that was Krishna's plan and Krishna's mercy, and Krishna is absolute, so his chastising, as we said, and his or his mercy in being soft to someone is the same. It's fully perfect, and it's fully the best for the other person, which ultimately means for them to awaken the love of Godhead. And so Arjuna, Prabhupada points out, was himself didn't want to fight actually, but for being convinced by Krishna, by speaking the Bhagavad Gita, he agreed to fight, and thus he was acting on. So that's the main point here. Prabhupada makes here, that he was thus acting on behalf of the Lord, which is shown that by him personally he didn't want to fight, but because Krishna wanted, he fought, and so he simply acted on behalf of the Lord. And by acting on behalf of the Lord, his killing was, Prabhupada says here, none different to if Krishna is killing. So it was also all good for the other persons. And and then he concluded in the last short paragraph that Uddhava seemingly lamented that his own position was less than that of the warriors on the battlefield of Kurukshetra because they had attained to Vaikuntha, whereas he remained to lament the disappearance of the Lord. So that's another. That's from the viewpoint of Uddhava, that why he's saying that he laments that actually he was instructed by the Lord personally to go to continue to Badarikashram and to also enlighten the sages there, and here with Vidura first. So he knew the Lord wants him to be here, but so he did it, and of course devotee happily follows the Lord, but at the same time, of course, devotees always want to be personally with the Lord, and that would be their personal preference. And so he was feeling jealous in that transcendentally of those warriors that they already are with the Lord in the spiritual world, whereas he had to wait finishing his pastimes on the earth as well before then going back to Dwarka in the spiritual world. And so but in contrast to yesterday's class where we discussed mostly Krishna's personal mercy, I want to go now more towards the other side, which Toshin Krishna also beautifully explained about the Lord's glancing upon someone, that it is not only like in case with his pure devotees, like you pointed out from the Kadya pastime, that when they were apparently dead by running there and this poisonous atmosphere, that then Krishna glancing upon them in pure love, and that he shed tears, torrents of tears, so much so that the tears formed the rivers, and touching directly all the Vrajabasis there, the Gopas first. And so they were not only, because generally it's mentioned that simply by, and of course Krishna can do, he's omnipotent, that simply by glancing upon he can revive someone. He can do anything simply by glancing, as with any of his senses he can do anything he likes. But so Prabhu explained that actually in more detail it was that even he not only glanced, but his glance meant that he was full of tears, and those tears touched them and revived them. And then Prabhu pointed out that yes, in one sense it's still also even on the non-devotees he glances like that, but not directly, but through his devotees. That devotees are sent to the material world to spread his mercy, as we know in certainly with someone like Srila Prabhupada, our founder Acharya, that they have nothing to do with the material world, but they simply come to fulfill the mission of the Lord, the will of the Lord, to reclaim all those suffering fallen souls. And so there, so Prabhu was saying that's how you can see that they indirectly glance. He glances upon the non-devotees also through the devotees thing, trying to preach to all those fallen souls. And I want to take out a few points from where this mercy of the devotees is particularly nicely coming out also, which I'm reading right now personally in the 4th canto of about coming towards the end of Prithu Maharaj's pastimes. Well, like last time, a few weeks ago when I spoke about that was on the appearance of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, where I mentioned about that how Prabhupada in the several times there in the section where before Prithu Maharaj appears, wherein his so-called father, King Vena, like when his pastimes are explained. Namely, that when the sages first see that when his father, King Anga, left, that they, of course, we know any time in Vedic times there is supposedly a strong ruler, one monarch who protects the citizens and makes sure that there's no miscreants coming up or anything. And so when the king is absent, then naturally rogues come out. And so that happened there when King Anga, being fed up by seeing his son not being able to reform him at all, and he left, he renounced, and then the sages saw that there's so much disturbance for all the people because all the rogues and thieves create havoc, and so they and Prabhupada, in all those cases he stresses this point that a real devotee, a real saintly person, does not just care about his own spiritual practice, such as particularly the jnanis do, that they simply try to be completely socially aloof and achieve liberation by their practice, which in their case is impersonal liberation, merging in the brahmacharya. Whereas a real devotee, Prabhupada points out many times that he is always concerned about the welfare of everyone. And so that was with the sages there at that time, first time when they saw that, so that's when they then installed King Vena, even though they knew he's not qualified, just to protect the citizens. But then when they saw how much havoc he created, then when he didn't listen to their advice, they killed him by chanting mantras. So again they acted actively for the welfare of the citizens, even though they personally have nothing to do with that. And then the third time when now it was time, now they had to get someone to replace King Vena, and so then they took his dead body, knowing that his body is actually from a very auspicious, or how do you say, exalted dynasty in her, namely from Dhruva Maharaj. And so they turned first device where one dwarf came out, Bahuka, and who took all the sinful directions of King Vena, and then from his arms appeared Prithu Maharaj and Archie. And so that was there, and then briefly now connecting to Prithu Maharaj. So Prithu Maharaj, he was, he's a Shaktivesh avatar. He was empowered with Palana Shakti, with the power to rule and thus to protect all the citizens perfectly. And so he, after being enthroned, where all the demigods, including even the Lord himself personally as Upendra, appeared and offered different gifts and worshipped him. And so then his first pastime, so to say, was that because King Vena was so sinful that Mother Earth had hidden all her opulences, and thus the citizens were suffering from starvation, and so they approached Prithu Maharaj, and so he first became very angry at Mother Bhumi and threatened her with arrows, and she took the form of a cow, tried to flee all over the universe, and so eventually then she pleaded to him, explaining her situation, why she did like that, and then of course eventually Prithu Maharaj became soft and accepted her prayers, and then he himself didn't, but first he sent Swayambhuva Manu to milk her, and then after that, one after the other, came all the different main sections of society, including the demigods, the demons, and the sages, the yogis. All of them, they got their specific necessities from the earth in the pastime in the form of milking her in the form of a cow. And the sages, for example, think they sent Brihaspati and they milked the Vedic hymns from Mother Earth. And so then after that, Maitreya Rishi describes to Vidura about what comes next. kind of forgot. So anyway, I'll just go now to. I remember that then another pastime of Prithviraj is where he performs 100 Ashwamedha Yagyas, and Lord Indra, who is the one who did that, and by doing that achieved his post as Indra, so he's always anxious about securing his post. He became anxious and appeared in the disguise as a sannyasi, and each time then stole the sacrificial horse, and in that way, and the pastime goes that there all the sages are still there as well, and all the demigods, and one of the sages, I think Atri Muni, sees Indra in his being disguised there, and points out to Prithviraj's son that to kill Indra, and so but every time when he sees Indra, then he becomes soft, doesn't kill him, and so that's why then Indra awards him the name Antardana, and means like giving him the mystic power to be able to disappear at any time and appear. And also another name he has, Vichitashvara, because he retrieves the sacrificial horse. But it ends up then that Lord Brahma himself appeals to Prithviraj not to finish this last 100 sacrifice, because it would just create more disturbance, Indra coming in more forms as false sannyasis, and thus which set the foundation for different pseudo-religions or asampradayas. And then even the Lord personally appears at the sacrificial arena there, along with bringing Indra and appealing to Prithviraj to please forgive Indra, that he is repenting. And so, which he does, of course, he embraces Indra, and there's a beautiful conversation between the Lord and Prithviraj. And then after that sacrifice, when then Prithviraj returns to his capital of his kingdom, it's also beautifully described how all the citizens have so much affection for Prithviraj, how beautifully they decorated everything, and how they eagerly awaited his glance, his blessings, and actually that's one nice point that comes out from there, that, and again the mercy of the Lord even on the general populace, that he's like, I'll briefly say again what Prabhupada describes then the purport of where it's explained that how the citizens, how they welcomed the king heartily, and how he glanced upon them mercifully and bestowed blessings upon their desired blessings. And Prabhupada points out there the difference of how in Vedic times, how the king, how much care he takes of all the citizens, and how responsible he is, that even if there's at any time some, how does he say it? Some grievances, then against his rule, then he's personally responsible, is personally ready that anyone can come, and he will resolve the issue. Whereas in our now so-called democratic government means there's no one responsible, and no one is ready to take care actually of the citizens. Like Prabhupada explains that a so-called democratic government is in which no one is responsible to mitigate grievances of citizens who are unable to personally meet the Supreme Executive Head. So, because, first of all, there's not one single person fully responsible, and secondly, generally unapproachable, that they are aloof from the small, ordinary citizens. Because in the verse here, it's explained that both the important and common citizens welcomed the king heartily, and he bestowed blessings upon them. And so I was thinking, that is also amazing form of how the Lord bestows his mercy upon even the conditioned souls, that he actually, if they follow how he gives the directions in the Vedas, then there is a monarch personally empowered by him who takes care nicely of all the citizens, which includes even other species. So, and whereas nowadays in our godless society, it's just more and more impersonal and irresponsible, and thus everyone suffers. So, and when Maitreya Rishi finishes this description about Prithamaraj going back there, then he just concludes by, and eventually Prithamaraj attained his supreme destination, but then Vidura inquires more about Prithamaraj, to speak more about Prithamaraj, and then he describes about that another time Prithamaraj was assembled with all the great personalities, all the sages and demigods, and he where he instructed them on different, like what everyone is supposed to follow, the Varnashram Dharma, and even more importantly then to perform devotional service, and for that then we need to understand the position of the devotees, we glorify the devotees and all of that, and he appeals to his citizens that it's reciprocal. If I follow properly my duty of protecting you, and you follow properly by engaging in devotional service and following the Varnashram Dharma, then both of us, we share our credits, our spiritual credits, our pious credits, and so he appeals to them like that, and they accept it heartily, and then they praise Prithamaraj, and while they are praising Prithamaraj, then appears, which the Lord already personally predicted to him when he came at the sacrificial arena, along with Indra, that he will meet the great sages, which is the 4 Kumaras. And so when they appear there, then Prithamaraj immediately worships them, washes their lotus feet, sprinkles the water on his head, and humbly approaches them and speaks in great restraint, and he points out about like how wonderful it is to even see such great personalities like yourself, that usually don't make yourself even visible to eyes of ordinary people, and further then he explains that. So I want to come particularly to this verse, that he says to them that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is always anxious to elevate the living entities who are His parts and parcels, and for their special benefit the Lord travels all over the world in the form of self-realized persons like you. And so he says here even that it is the Supreme Lord Himself who comes as great personalities like you. And how does he say like that? Like Prabhupada explains in the purport, because such pure devotees do act completely on behalf of the Lord to fulfill His desires. So Prabhupada says here later in the purport then that, again pointing out the difference between the different mentalities that people have in the material world, that actually everyone wants to achieve his, or elevate himself to the highest benefit that what he thinks of can be, which is for the karmis to have maximum sense gratification, for the jnanis to achieve impersonal liberation. But Prabhupada says, but the devotee's high position is in preaching all over the world the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore the devotees are actually the representatives of the Supreme Lord, and as such they travel all over the world directly as Narayan, because they carry Narayan within their hearts and preach His glories. So, and then Prabhupada quotes, which we sing every morning in Guru Ashtakam, from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, about how he is non-different, kintu prabhoya priya vatasi, because he is very dear to the Lord, and like Prabhupada says here, that a devotee is as good as Narayan, not by becoming Narayan, but by becoming the most confidential servant of Narayan. So because he is one in desire with the Lord, in that sense he is non different from the Lord, because he simply acts on behalf of the Lord. And we're over time now. there's all those verses actually, they're beautifully, and the Prabhupada is giving, point out this mercy of the devotees, how the Lord uses his devotees as his instruments. So, yeah, okay. Kantarachima Bhaktam Ki Jai. Ki Jai.